are familiar with the Teams platform. This session is being recorded. If you are not comfortable being recorded, you may end the session by clicking the red Leave button. This slide shows a screenshot of the control panel that we see. It may look different depending on the device you are utilizing. Number 1 is the mute button. At this time, everyone needs to ensure their microphone is muted. As a courtesy, please be sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking. Number 2 is the chat button. Once it is clicked, the chat box on the right should appear. You can submit questions, attachments, and messages to presenters, panelists, and attendees throughout the session. You may also communicate or request assistance with technical difficulties here. Number 3 is raise hand button. If you would like to provide your questions, comments verbally during the Q&A session, raise your hand and the moderator will call on you to unmute. Number 4 is the leave button. If you need to leave the listening session for any reason, please click the leave button. Closed captioning. While not identified on this slide, if you would like to view live captions during today's session, please click the ellipses, the 3 dots going across, then click on Language and Speech and choose Turn on Live Captions. Co-ops can work in any sector of the economy. The Interagency Working Group on Cooperative Development meetings that we've held since 2022 address how cooperatives work in food, housing, care, and in other industries, as well as cooperative statistics. This website maintains recordings of all those meetings and has funding, partner organizations, tools, and resources for cooperatives. Please also review our Cooperative Services website that includes publications and other information to help with cooperative development. Please also look for the Interagency publication, the Cooperative Quarterly. In the service of time, we will keep introductions short with our distinguished panel. Their full bios will be posted in the chat. Administrator Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan started as USDA Rural Development, Rural Business Cooperative Services Administrator in January and came from Rural Development as Illinois' State Director with a wealth of knowledge. Administrator Dirksen-Londrigan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. I'm Betsy. This is a real honor to be speaking with you today. So I just want to say good afternoon and welcome to the Equitable Governance meeting of the Interagency Working Group on Cooperative Development. The title is about as long as my own name, which Megan, you did a great job pronouncing, by the way. So it's a pleasure to be here to address you. We are honored that the 2014 Farm Bill authorized the Secretary of Agriculture to chair this interagency working group. The working group's task force is to foster cooperative development and ensure coordination with federal agencies and cooperative organizations. So we thank you, our cooperative and governmental partners and private sector partners, for being here today to address this important topic. So what are cooperatives, right? We're going to recap for you. Cooperatives are a type of business that is organized for the mutual benefit of the members who use its goods or services. Co-ops are controlled democratically by their member patrons. These member patrons own, use, finance, and very importantly, govern their own cooperatives. Profits, which are called patronage refunds, are distributed to members based on how much they have used their cooperative. The amount of equity return provided to investors is strictly limited. And while most C corporations must maximize profits for shareholders, cooperatives are really special. They're a special subset of C corporations that can have multiple goals, including helping their employees, suppliers, or community in addition to helping their members. This flexibility allows cooperatives to use creative approaches, which can save jobs and ultimately the business, particularly in times of crisis. Maybe that's why our USDA co-op program statistics demonstrate that U.S. agricultural cooperatives are some of the most long-lived businesses around the whole world. Cooperatives are known for helping individuals build wealth and economic power, but they might be less well known for helping individuals build capacity. And members learn more than just business skills. They learn to trust, to make decisions, to manage conflict, to work as a team, and to really take on leadership roles. Studies show cooperative members are more involved in their communities and participate more actively as citizens. Cooperatives operate under a set of principles outlined by the International Cooperative Alliance. Principle 1, voluntary and open membership, says that cooperatives are open to all persons without gender, social, racial, political, or religious discrimination. Under Principle 7, concern for community, cooperatives work for the sustainable development of their communities through policies approved by their members. Members' civic engagement may have something to do with Principle 7. An interest in promoting diversity aligns with Principle 1. At USDA, we've seen co-ops' involvement in communities translate to making sure that membership reflects the communities that the co-op serves. Many co-ops are also actively working to make sure that board composition reflects their membership and community. It's exciting to see everything that cooperatives are doing, and it's exciting to see cooperatives provide leadership opportunities to diverse communities, and it's happening all over. In fact, when the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives asked cooperative members and supporters to participate in their diversity, equity, and inclusion trends study, participants revealed that many co-ops are actively trying to recruit a more diverse board. We're very excited to hear more about the work that cooperatives are doing to promote diversity and provide leadership opportunities. We'll be hearing from Courtney Berner, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives, who's done extensive research on cooperative governments and who oversaw the publication of the center's diversity study. Courtney will be moderating a distinguished panel of individuals who will discuss how cooperatives can work toward diverse leadership and participation by all members. Before I turn the program over to Courtney, though, I want to make sure that I personally invite you to our other 2024 meetings. On July 11th, the working group will address the use of cooperatives to help citizens transition after they've been incarcerated. The meeting will include cooperative members Mary Sutton of Collective Remake of Los Angeles and Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nembard, Cooperative Hall of Fame member and author of Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Our final meeting of 2024 will take place during Cooperative Month in October, and we'll address equitable cooperative ecosystems. So with that, have an excellent meeting, and I'm happy to turn it over to Courtney. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Betsy. First off, I'd just like to say what an honor it was to be invited to share some of our research, the UW Center for Cooperatives research, as part of this meeting, and really to facilitate a conversation about the way cooperatives are working to ensure member representation and sort of in the many ways that we think about member representation. So just a quick note on how we will move through our time together. Some people like a roadmap, so I like to provide one. So I'm going to share a bit of information about two studies that we will be referencing throughout the conversation. And then I will essentially alternate between sharing a few pieces of data on a specific topic that relates back to this conversation, and then asking the panelists a question that's related to the topic. So the goal is really to share the data and share some of the things we've learned, but to put these issues into an everyday context of like how people working within cooperatives and cooperative associations are wrestling with some of these issues. So if I could get the next slide, which is not that one, the slides, but I'm also happy to I'll just do what I was going to do. So want to quickly introduce our panelists. So as it was mentioned earlier, the full bios will be in the chat. but I'd like to say a couple words about these folks so you know who we're talking to. So first is Allanah Hines. Allanah has worked at Weaver Street Market, which is a worker and consumer-owned food co-op in North Carolina for over 15 years. For the last 4 years, she has served as the Chief Culture, Engagement, and Impact Officer and held a seat on the Board of Directors. For 3 of those years on the board, she has served as the board chair. So thanks so much for being with us, Allanah. Eric Paulson grew up on a dairy farm in Virginia and currently serves as the executive secretary of the Virginia State Dairymen's Association, a role he has held since 2009. And Eric, you might hate me for this, but I have to admit, being someone who lives in Wisconsin, I'd never thought about dairy farming in Virginia, but I feel like I have a better appreciation for it now after reading your bio. In 2021, Eric was elected to the board of the Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, another organization in his state with a really strong commitment to serving the residents of rural Virginia. So thanks so much for being here, Eric. And then last but certainly not least, Sylandi Brown is a board member of the National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA International, so NCBA CLUSA, where she is vice chair of the governance committee and a member of the equity and inclusion working group. In addition to her leadership role at NCBA CLUSA, she is the communications manager for the U.S. Overseas Cooperative Development Council. So we've got a great panel. Thank you, Sylandi, for being here. 2 folks who are in cooperatives, and then Sylandi, who is representing the board of our Apex Cooperative Association. So with that, let's jump in. So if I could get the next slide, please. So before launching into the data, as I said, I'd like to provide a bit of background on the 2 studies that I will be referencing during our time together. The first is the Cooperative Governance Research Initiative, which the UW Center for Cooperatives launched in 2021. The seed for this project was planted during my early days as a cooperative development specialist. So I started at the center back in 2011. And a lot of the startup groups that I worked with would ask me how other cooperatives structured their governing bodies and what practices they used. And as a relatively new director, I didn't have a lot of experience to fall back on, and I couldn't find any data to help me answer these questions. So fast forward many years later, I was in a position to launch a research project to generate some of that data. Admittedly, a maybe overly ambitious project, but we decided to give it a try. And from the outset, our goal has always been to collect data on governance practices across sectors and over time that would generate information and tools that real co-ops can use to develop, reflect upon, and improve their governance practices. So the 2021 data collection consisted of a survey covering the topics that you see here on the slide, as well as follow-up interviews with 21 individuals from 11 cooperatives in 8 different sectors. And I just want to say that the survey questions were informed by input from an advisory group that represents a wide range of cooperative associations. So cooperative leaders have been involved in this project from the outset. Next slide, please. So with the help of our advisory committee, we built a sample of about 4,400 co-ops, credit unions, and insurance mutuals. And of those, 500 cooperatives completed the 2021 survey, which we felt pretty good about, given that it was a 30-minute firm level survey that we'd never done before. And as you can see here, we had pretty good geographic representation, as well as good diversity across industries. We also had a great deal of diversity in terms of the type of cooperatives, their age, as well, and sort of how they came about, mergers, startup conversions. And again, from the outset, we intended to repeat the survey every few years in order to observe trends over time. And we're actually launching the 2024 survey in 2 days. So we're on about an every 3-year cycle. Next slide, please. So the next study that I will be referencing is the diversity, equity, and inclusion trends in the cooperative community, which I want to be clear, the UW Center for Cooperatives conducted this study on behalf of NCBA CLUSA and the Cooperative Development Foundation, thanks to a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So I want to give full credit to my former colleague, Laura Hansen-Schlachter, who conducted the survey and wrote the final report. So others were really more deeply involved in this, and we were asked by NCBA and CDF to do this work. So, and this is because CDF and NCBA CLUSA knew that cooperatives were increasingly adopting practices to promote DEI internally and build power in the communities they serve, but very little was known about how this work had been unfolding across sectors. So the survey we designed set out to begin answering 2 main questions, which you can see on that slide. And then the survey itself one of the challenges I've learned now over the years doing surveys, that you always have more questions that you want to ask than you can ask. And so this first survey focused in the context of organizational practices on, does your cooperative evaluate its culture of workforce inclusion? Some systems to track demographics of staff, directors, and members. And then it really focused on gender and race in terms of the sort of types of diversity that we were asking about. There's obviously so much more that we could have talked about, but those were some of the parameters for that survey. And there are links to the final reports for both of these projects on the final slide here too. So next slide, please. This survey was targeted to members or supporters of NCBA. And so we invited 360 cooperatives that were members or supporters of NCBA to complete the survey online between March and May of 2021. So we were busy doing surveys in 2021 here at the Center for Co-ops. In total, 140 cooperatives submitted a usable survey, and in most cases, the co-op CEO or general manager completed the survey. Survey participants were quite varied and also reflected a broad spectrum of cooperatives across the US. About half were consumer co-ops, about a third had been established in the last 2 decades. Nearly 40% were from the retail sector, and these co-ops were headquartered in 33 states and the District of Columbia. So one last thing I want to emphasize before we move into the data is just that neither of the samples of these studies are representative samples of U.S. cooperatives. One of the challenges in cooperative research is that there is no list of cooperatives in the country, and so you always have to build your own sample. And yes, this is not fully representative. This is we're reporting on sort of what we found, but not mapping that back in any way to the full universe of cooperatives in the U.S. All right, next slide, please. So one more set of comments before we dive into the data. I just want to spend a moment to clarify what exactly we mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion in this context. So just to level set for this conversation, we consider diversity the representation of all our varied identities and differences collectively as an individuals. Equity seeks to ensure fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness in access to information and resources for all. And inclusion builds a culture of belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. So I want to acknowledge that the cooperative structure, which Betsy did a great job of summarizing earlier. So this cooperative structure in which the board of directors is elected by and from the membership can create some constraints in terms of board diversity, sort of as the diversity of the field of members can and often does impact the diversity of its representative body. So I just want to acknowledge that tension within the model. And according to the ABCs of Co-op Impact framework that NCBA published back in 2018 around DEI and cooperatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion are evident in the extent to which a cooperative's membership reflects the communities it serves and gives a voice and leadership opportunities to historically excluded communities and individuals. So for me, in essence, it sort of boils down to 2 key questions for cooperatives as we think about DEI, as we think about member representation and equitable governance. So the first question is, how well does our board represent and understand our membership? And the second is, how well does our membership represent and really understand our community? And then a third question, we'll get into this a little bit later during the panel conversation, is, who do we consider our community? And do we need to broaden that perhaps? So next slide, please. So we're going to kick off the conversation with this data by looking at some of the data on member representation and the needs of members. So in the 2021 survey, COOGRI survey, Cooperative Governance Research Initiative, we asked cooperatives about the strategies they use to recruit candidates to run for the board. And the overarching picture that emerged is that sort of board nominations in many co-ops are a bit of an insider's game. A large majority of respondents, 71%, have a board committee that's responsible for the nominations process. And then in the majority of cases, nominating committee members are selected by the board. Only 4% of respondents reported that nominating committee members are elected by the broader co-op membership. And then the most common board recruitment strategy by far is identifying candidates through personal or professional networks of current directors. So again, this is not representative of all co-ops, but there's certainly the board has in many co-ops has a lot of sort of control over who gets who's being brought into the process to run for the board. Next slide, please. One aspect of member representation that we want to talk about is just demographic representation. So another question we asked in the Cougary survey was how well the demographics of current board members mirror those of the membership overall. And as you can see on this slide, across all respondents, approximately half said extremely or very well. However, there were some really notable differences across types and sectors. So in both agricultural and worker co-ops, 2/3 of respondents said the demographics of current board members mirror those of the membership overall extremely or very well, whereas only 34% of food co-ops and 40% of credit unions said the same. Next slide, please. There are also some interesting differences by co-op sector regarding how well the board understands the needs of members, another question we asked. Again, ag co-ops and worker co-ops had the most positive responses. 80% of ag co-ops and 72% of worker co-ops believe their board understands the needs of members extremely or very well. But just over a quarter of food co-ops said the same. So some interesting differences depending on what type of co-op you might be in. So this brings me to the first set of questions that I would like to ask. So Sylandi and Eric, this one's for you first. What strategies have your co-op or your co-op association, in your case, Sylandi, used to ensure board members understand the needs and preferences of members? And Eric, why don't you go first?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I think one thing for the electric co-op is our membership is our community. We have a predefined territory, so we don't pick and choose our members. If you live in that area, you are a member of Rappahannock Electric, and so for us, understanding our community isn't something really. It's not aspirational; it's a necessity. So one of the ways we do that is through passive means like surveys. We do surveys quarterly to try to get a feel for what are the kind of the issues that our members are facing. And then we also have what we call power hours. So that's a little bit more active where it's a kind of a phone town hall where we have leadership from Rappahannock, our board chair, the president, the CEO on the call to first pass on information, but then most of it is to answer questions from the membership at large to kind of see what is their concerns they're facing. And either they'll answer it there live, or if it's something that's going to take some time, they'll say, hey, we'll get back to you. And we try to get back to them within 24 hours with an answer. So those are kind of, I think, for us, something that's really important is that we want to make sure that we are representing and we are responding to what our community says. So that's something like our Rappahannock, when we developed our DEI policy, we actually co-sponsored a resolution with the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, encouraging all electric co-ops to have a policy like that in place. It's something we thought is just something that it makes sense for electric cooperatives, especially since we do serve our communities. We want to make sure our communities are being represented through everything we do.
Great. Thanks so much, Eric. Sylandi?
Sure. Thanks so much, Courtney, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to speak on behalf of the NCBA board. I would say for us, it's very clear that the NCBA board directly recognizes the connection with membership. So we are very, very close to our membership team and are active in membership engagement and recruitment efforts. So in terms of understanding more so the needs and the preferences of the members specifically, we've implemented various strategic initiatives. And so one of those is ensuring that there's a board representative on NCBA's various volunteer councils. Now, these are councils that really serve as those important platforms for members to voice their concerns, to share ideas, and really collaborate on initiatives to really drive the cooperative movement forward. So by having that board representative present in those councils, what we're ensuring is that there's a direct line of communication between our members and the board, which again fosters that deeper understanding of the needs and the aspirations of the membership. Now, very similar to Eric, we also have a co-op circle platform where it is basically an online community really designed to facilitate connections between members. We have a co-op circle happy hour where we also have that kind of virtual convening of the membership, which is great to leverage digital platforms like this because it's making sure that these efforts are inclusive and accessible to all members, regardless of their geographic location. And so there's a lot that goes into that, but we're definitely as a board very committed to continuing to understand that. We know that this is ongoing work. So we actually have a board self-assessment as well, where we're actually evaluating our effectiveness in this area each year. And those are specific items that we're looking at of, how are we understanding and acting on behalf of members' interests and needs? How are we communicating clearly about our actions in, the boardroom and the decisions that we make, and looking also at what that value is that we are providing to our membership. So even in just the past recent months, we've identified communication with members as a really key priority. So we've begun to implement a number of different actions to even increase that, such as doing board reports after each of our meeting that comes from a specific board member, not necessarily just the chair, but any board member who's representing the membership in that way. So again, it's an ongoing process, but it's one that we definitely prioritize and seek to continuously evaluate.
Great. Thanks so much, Sylandi. So, rural electric cooperatives have sort of their built-in community. There's boundaries around what the utility serves. But at many food co-ops, answering this question involves stepping back and trying to better understand the needs and preferences of the broader community and who's part of that community. So part of Weaver Street's journey in this regard has been rethinking how you define your community. So Allanah, can you tell us a bit about how Weaver Street has approached that process?
Yes. Well, first, I'd like to start by saying thank you so much for having me and having Weaver Street in this platform. As a food co-op, we do differ in the fact that our members choose us. So we essentially, our competition is the larger grocery market. So food co-ops are competing against the Wegmans, the Aldis, the large grocery chains that have much more money and it don't involve as much community. So when we are in a location, we are completely dependent. And so that is also helpful for us in making sure that we do represent the needs of the people in our community, because there's so many other options. So for us, and I will say, so I'm a worker owner in operations. I do the DEI, and then on the board, I am the chair. So I do hold both seats in a very unique way to where, I bring DEI onto the board, but board DEI is very different from operational DEI. So when we do talk about DEI on the board and we do talk about representation, our board within its 7 members does have 2 worker owners, 2 consumer owners, 2 appointed members, and the general manager. So we have the ability to bring in different parties, different populations of our employees and of our consumers, but it really still is. I will say that I do feel Weaver Street is a pretty good reflection of the data, to where the ones that know. And a lot of people are just there for a job. And so there's a gap between understanding that you have a board to your job and being able to participate on that board and truly reflecting, are these our employees, the ones that are running for the board, or are they the ones that leadership has essentially pointed out and said, these are the next leaders of our co-op. So when we do take that step back, and we did about 4 years ago have to look at ourselves around the time that I joined the board and say, is this representative of even our employee community? Because our employee community is not necessarily representative of our shopping community. And our shopping community is not necessarily representative of the community at large in which we serve of North Carolina. So that for us became a thing of, what is the system that we're creating so that we can achieve the results that we want, so that we do have that diversity. And what is that definition of diversity? Is it race and gender? Is it perspective? Is it background? Is it taste? Is it different things like that? So for us, it's, exactly as Sylandi said, it's a continued learning lesson in understanding this work won't be over this year. We can't stop with one board with, we have a 2-year turnover each time, but for us, it really took time to also understand, what is the gap between the board and operations? And what is the gap between the board and the community? Do people know what it is? Do our workers understand what it is to serve on our board? And representation matters. And once you get there, are you supported? So our DEI had to go past the race and gender, and also, what does inclusivity mean when you have a grocery worker that is now serving on your board and expected to read these board documents, understand financial statements, and attend meetings once a month on a Wednesday night, because we are open every day of the year with the exception of Thanksgiving and Christmas. So DEI was a lot for Weaver Street. It has been.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allanah. All right, back to the data. So I will wait just a moment. So next slide, please. Then the one after that, please. There we go. Okay. So next, I'd like to cover some of the data that we collected through the Cooperative Governance Research Initiative survey about the demographic composition of cooperative boards. I want to acknowledge that this data was not self-reported. So most surveys were completed by one person, sometimes two people on behalf of their cooperative. So I just want to give that caveat, but that's just an example, one example of many compromises one makes when trying to do survey research. So as we move into this section, I do again want to acknowledge that there's a high degree of variability across co-op types and industries in terms of the diversity of their members, the diversity of their boards, their interest in diversity, and the different types of diversity being pursued. So let's start with gender. As you can see on this slide, gender diversity varies pretty significantly across different types of cooperatives. On average, housing cooperatives have the most gender diverse boards, and producer cooperatives have the least gender diverse boards. Worker co-ops as a group are also very gender diverse, but sort of interestingly, when you drill down to individual worker co-op boards, the gender makeup can vary greatly between industries. So for example, a worker-owned childcare or home care cooperative is far more likely to have an exclusively female board, whereas a worker-owned construction firm is more likely to have a mostly male board. So of course, as always, there's even more nuance underlying these broader statistics. So across all Cougary participants, so all 500 cooperatives that took the survey, the average board, the share of men on the average board is 62% male. So next slide, please. We also asked about the racial and ethnic composition of cooperative boards in the Cougary survey. And in terms of race, boards of, again, there's a lot of difference here across different types of co-ops. And what you're seeing on this slide is sort of reporting on race and ethnicity in the same graphic. So in terms of race, boards of participating cooperatives are 84% white at the mean and 100% white at the median. And as the figure shows, producer cooperatives and insurance mutuals had sort of the least diverse boards in terms of racial diversity and ethnic diversity, and worker cooperatives have the most racially and ethnically diverse boards on average. We will go to the next slide. We also asked respondents how likely they were to pursue goals related to board diversity in the next 3 years. All respondents who answered that they were even slightly likely to pursue diversity goals were then asked what types of diversity they planned to prioritize during that time period. The most common response was race and ethnicity, followed by specific professional skills, gender, and age. And so I just shared a snapshot of our data sort of at a high level on gender, race, and ethnicity. But those certainly are not, Allannah's already alluded to this. Those are certainly not the only types of diversity or ways of thinking about diversity. Several people, one of my favorite parts of this project was all of the interviews I got to do with board chairs and CEOs and other board members afterwards. And several people we interviewed for this study emphasized what one credit union board member referred to as diversity in many dimensions. So life experience, professional background, geography, even the sort of your specific farming practices, what you sell to the co-op. So in other words, an overarching takeaway sort of across these interviews we did, that we did to really sort of bring some life to some of the data, was that the board should not only reflect the ascriptive characteristics of members, some of these demographic characteristics, but also the board should be able to relate to their varied perspectives and bring different opinions to the boardroom. So as co-ops embark on the work of being more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, they really have sort of two critical questions to answer. And I want to thank Allanah. She and I had an early conversation leading up to the planning of this, and she helped frame up some of my thinking about this. And I always like to give credit where credit is due. And so two of these questions, what is diversity, as a co-op's thinking about doing this work, what does diversity mean to them and why are they pursuing it? So that's the question that I have for our three panelists. How does your cooperative or cooperative association, in the case of NCBA CLUSA, define or think about diversity? And then how has your organization articulated the why behind pursuing diversity? So let's go back in reverse order. So we'll start with you, Allanah, and then Sylandi, and then Eric.
I'll try not to go on for too long on this particular question. I love it. It's everything and fantastic. So I'll say, as the board chair and as the DEI manager, I lead a lot through my lived experience, especially right now. So after COVID, when everyone decided to reignite the socio-political initiatives, I always ask every conversation I'm in, why do you want me on your board? I'm not here for the optics. I'm really not. I take a nice picture. I appreciate it. But when you bring people onto your board, you also want to make sure that they are included. And so I do. And, I love that Courtney actually referred to our conversation. One thing that I essentially said is, when you know that you're going to have a baby, you prepare the space in the room. So you decide, what room is this baby going to be in? You get a crib, you get a blanket, you get a car seat. You don't just go and say, we're going to have a baby and get home and decide how it's going to happen. So I say the same thing when you do decide to take on a DEI initiative. It's not just finding Black and brown people and saying, do you want to be a part of this? Because too often and too many times, and there are many articles about it, you do have people in these spaces that soon and very quickly recognize, I'm just here because you wanted to take a picture, because you wanted to say you did it, and you wanted to check a box. So for us, it did become quickly, so I can get people. It's not the people, but it's the education. It's the allowing of the space. It's the allowing of the questions, things that a lot of people on boards, you've been looking at financial statements for 20, 30, 40 years. Maybe you came from the industry, but now you have people that are coming from the grocery store, literally the store, and you want them to be able to participate, and you also want them to advance. The same way, when you bring that baby home, you want to make sure that they're happy. You want to make sure that they are fed, they are rested, that the entire family unit is able to thrive. You want to do the same with DEI, to absolutely no exclusion. And so a lot of times, and I do get the question quite often, how do we find more Black people on the board? You need to figure out what you're doing to actually make it so that people are going to understand and appreciate why you have invited them there, and then they will invite other people. If I don't feel included, I'm not going to stay, and I'm going to also let other people know that's not the place that you're going to want to be, because they have not done any work to make sure that you are actually have the space to come, to be yourself, to fail forward, to be curious. So it's a lot of everything, but you have to start with the inclusivity before you can expect any sort of diversity, and it has to be stabilized in equity.
I am going to adopt the phrase failing forward. I don't know that I'd heard that before, but I like it. Thank you, Allanah. Sylandi, how is NCBA CLUSA sort of thinking about defining diversity and sort of what the why is behind pursuing those initiatives?
Sure. Well, this is a big question, Courtney, for sure. And I guess I'll start by just saying, when I think about NCBA CLUSA and why I love this association so much, there's such a deep history, right, of fostering an inclusive economy through cooperatives, which is very much inherent in the cooperative business model itself. So when you think about, principles of open and voluntary membership, when you think about cooperative values of quality and equity, yes, those are fundamental, but what we were realizing is that there's an importance to intentionality here, to really make sure that these values are not only ones that we are saying exist, but ones that we're really implementing in our organization and beyond. So when I think about our why, it takes me back to April 2019, when an open letter to leadership noted that striving for inclusion and diversity, it's not a passive or an intuitive goal. It's something that requires deliberate and action-oriented efforts that start at the top, with the leaders of the organization. So this was really a call to action that kind of led us to our why, that inspired us to lean further into our role as change agents to really amplify the voices of those within the organization, advocating for equitable treatment and opportunity, and implementing necessary policies and procedures to hold our leaders accountable. Now, how we've kind of taken hold of that at the board level, love seeing the compensation data that was, or the composition data that was present in this study, because it kind of applies to the NCBA board as well. So we kind of took an approach to doing a board composition assessment that allows us to take in incoming data from the incoming board. And just like what we've mentioned, diversity comes in a lot of different forms. So that's things like industry, to areas of expertise, to race, ethnicity, to gender, to even age, that really kind of serves as that guiding tool for our recruitment strategies and for our nominating committee. Just on a personal note, I'm personally very glad that this assessment exists, because I think that it kind of led to my initial appointment on the board, who at the time was a 24-year-old Gen Z African-American woman from rural Georgia, who at the time was working for the smallest electric cooperative in the state of Georgia, to not only have a seat on the NCBA board, but to really have a voice in the process. And I think that's what kind of distinguishes this difference between, just checking off a box versus, as Allanah was mentioning, kind of creating and cultivating that space to make sure that the people who come in are actively being heard throughout the process. So again, it's something that we recognize as something that needs to be intentional, something that's deliberate, and something that's action-oriented in terms of the diversity. But it's also something we recognize that evolves. The way that we think about diversity 5 years ago or 10 years ago was a lot different than how we're thinking about diversity today. So even in our board composition assessments, what we're finding is, let's include, more, diverse gender identities. Let's include more people of color. It's a process that continues, and it's one that requires that baseline assessment first, to kind of create those data-driven decisions and strategic approaches to how we're making sure the board is diverse and representative of the membership.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Allanah had to say. I think the why is an incredibly important part. Are you doing this to check a box? Are you doing this to have a plan that sits on a shelf and collect dust? And I think a big piece of it has to be accountability. Are you going to hold yourself accountable that once you put it in place, you're going to follow it through? And that's, I think, something we obviously are trying to incorporate, integrate DEI into our organization through our workforce and its interactions and with our community engagement, but also in the design and access of the programs we offer to our members. So something as simple as we have energy efficiency programs where contractors come in and help make your home more efficient. Well, one of the things is you make sure you're hiring those contractors from the communities you serve. And so people from their local community they feel comfortable with, so that they will take advantage of those programs. Things like that. I mean, I think it's something we want to make sure we're providing fair and equitable access to our utility services, supporting our local businesses that have the same values as us. And I think one of the big why, I mean, I think our president CEO summed it up great in a quote I have here is, our success is furthered as we embrace a culture where all employees are inspired and encouraged to share their passion, talents, and ideas, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, or religious belief. Everyone is treated equally, no exceptions. It's simply who we are. And that to me, I think kind of sums up a lot of what we do. I mean, we're here to serve our community. And so we need to reach out to them. We can't think that everyone's gonna have the same life views or viewpoints of things. So we need to make sure we're reaching out, we're getting the input from our members, and then having that feedback through our entire system so that everyone does feel like this is an organization that represents them. I mean, we're the electric company. I mean, most people don't think about their electric company. They expect their light switches to come on, but we're so much more than that, and we want people to understand that we're here for them. I mean, it's a like as the co-op's principle is, it's an organization, a company made up of its member owners, and so I think that's something we try to hold on to with dear life every day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. All right, back to the data. Just like a game show. Like back. All right, only one slide, and then we get to hear from folks again. So the next topic I want to briefly dip into is, and it was alluded to in Betsy's opening remarks, is sort of the level of interest in DEI efforts. And I'm switching now, there's still a bit of Kukri data in here, but we're switching now more to the data from the DEI study that my former colleague Laura Hansen-Schlachter worked on. So one of the first takeaways from that study was that there really is a strong interest across NCBA Inclusive's members in this work. 86% of respondents to the DEI survey said that improving DEI in their cooperative over the next 5 years is extremely or very important. A follow-up question asked if the co-op has specific organizational goals related to diversity, equity, or inclusion. And interestingly, goals related to inclusion were the most common. So again, since another formative conversation with Allanah, it was actually the same conversation, but another formative aspect of the conversation with Allanah was, again, this emphasis on starting with inclusion. I don't really know why in the United States we put it at the end of DEI, why we did that. Since there's really clearly a need to create an inclusive environment if we are going to both recruit and retain diversity. And so back to the panelists, I'm wondering if you can share just 1 or 2 tangible actions that your co-op has taken related to creating an inclusive culture or environment. Sylandi, let's start with you, and then Eric, and then Allanah.
Sure, thanks. I think, there's so many ways to start. I think starting somewhere is one of the most important things, and recognizing that it isn't something that has to be figured out automatically. But one of the pieces that was mentioned in the DEI survey report, and it's actually noted by our president and CEO, Mr. Doug O'Brien, is just making your intentions known from the very, very beginning. And I think that's something that we did at the board level, in making sure, whether that's forming a resolution or just starting to have a conversation of understanding what an inclusive environment, an inclusive economy, understanding what that looks like and making sure there's a consistent understanding of that. I think when we talk about having that inclusive culture and inclusive environment, is very much in the name. It has to be something that everyone in the organization, no matter where you fall, you feel connected to that, and you feel a part of that process as well. Mm-hmm. So as mentioned before, because our call to action really kind of encouraged us to kind of start at the top, that's what we did at the board level, and really making sure that that's a statement, that again isn't just something that we're saying, but then following it up with that, inclusive strategic plan and work plan to go along with that resolution. But I think starting there by making your intentions known is one of the most important things.
Great, thanks, Sylandi. Eric?
Yeah, I think from the executive level in REC, we had all the executives kind of they shared why DEI is important to them and how they think it's going to impact the cooperative and the communities. In addition to then holding DEI training, obviously for all levels of leadership and employee in all of our offices, we also created a DEI advisor group made up of 20 volunteer employees that meet once a month to have the say and bring their lived experiences to the advisory group. Is this something just a constant way to kind of keep providing that feedback on maybe areas of growth and as things change, because it is constantly evolving. It kind of gets that back to that same plan. It can't be a static plan. It's got to kind of grow with the organization and the community. And I think some of the other things we're doing when we're reaching out to members, we realize we have to use radio ads. Some people, social media is important to some people, or some people still like print literature. So we're trying to make sure we cover all of our bases. But then simple things like with our app, we want to make sure we have accessibility functions in all of our apps for people who might have disabilities. We want to make sure when we're recruiting, both for interns and for employees, that we're searching everywhere. I mean, selfishly, I want the best of the best. I want to make sure REC is going out and looking everywhere. I want to make sure we're not just going back to the same 1 or 2 institutions. I want to make sure we're going everywhere and recruiting the best people, because yeah, like selfishly, that makes us a better organization if we can get the best from everywhere and then have that kind of diversity. So I think that's the kind of thing that helps us. I think we still have areas where we can grow. I mean, I think as more and more, we want to make sure we're offering our services in multiple languages. I mean, it's something a lot of people wouldn't think about, but it is a growing concern, especially if as we have communities, more transient communities We want to make sure that we're there, be able to reach out to them and be something that makes it easier for them to understand and participate as well.
Great, thanks. Allanah?
So I'll say within our board, operations is another mixed bag, but within our board, two things that immediately come to mind. One was not long after I joined the board, we actually updated our in statement to not just say that we're reaching out to our members, but we're also reaching out to potential owners. So it's not just the ones that are with us right now, but they're the ones everybody we hope can be an owner of our co-op. And another really big thing that has happened genuinely this month was that Weaver Street Market Board of Directors adopted an 8th principle of diversity, equity, and inclusion outside of the international conversation around it. So exactly as Sylandi said, it really is, it's making it very intentional and it's saying it outright so that there is that accountability that Eric spoke of. You know, we can't just say, hey, we're going to do it and we keep it a secret, but we say it out loud. So, 4 years ago, when I first joined the board, not long after, we actually hired a consultant to help us understand what does DEI on a board look like. I had done it in operations, but especially being new to the board and learning exactly what board operations was, policy governance, there would have been another job just to say, well, what does this do when you align it with DEI? So she actually provided a worksheet that I'm not sure that we would have been able to really arrive at alone, but it helped us to understand a lot. And we had to take a look at ourselves. So it was things like our meeting started at 7:00 on a Wednesday night and would sometimes go 3+ hours. People had kids, people, had to wake up for work the next day. So we also looked at things like power hoarding. Is only one person speaking in the agenda? Are we allowing space for everybody to say something? Are we allowing space for the attendees to actually come to our meetings and to speak? So it was those small changes of just saying we are going to create an inclusive meeting so that if you do have a worker owner or a consumer owner or whoever wants to attend, that you don't essentially have to set aside half your day in order to come to our meeting. And we're going to speak in terms that everybody can understand, even if you haven't been able to read the board report prior to the meeting, which a lot of our attendees, they don't have access because they haven't been approved. So it's how do we want people to interact with us and how are we interacting with people? So even updating our board schedule so that every month isn't a meeting where we all sit together and you have to figure out where we are and how to attend and be on time. Now the board is making themselves more present in more of our co-op spaces. When we have co-op fairs, we have a board tent where you come and you speak to us. What would you like to see the board do? What would you like to see in the vision and the direction of the co-op so that it's not this club where if you know, but you're just in an open space in or around our co-op and you just happen upon the board and we're so excited to come talk to you. So it's been a lot of cleaning our own house before we can ask other people to come and visit our house.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to ask to go back to the slides one more time. So the second big takeaway from the DEI survey is that DEI interventions aimed at current and prospective employees are quite common among NCBA Inclusive members. Respondents were mainly asked about their use of targeted recruitment activities. And so at least 3/4 of participating co-ops advertise jobs in places that reach diverse audiences, use welcoming language in hiring communications, and require position vacancy listings to be transparent. And about half encourage specific groups to apply for jobs at their cooperatives. Next slide, please. Staff training, DEI training for staff is also quite common, which is not surprising. Training is, one of the most common interventions in organizations, but it can be one that tends to have a much larger impact on individual biases rather than workplace inequality. And it's often, not always, again, don't want to generalize, it's often a one-off intervention rather than something that's deeply connected to an ongoing commitment to DEI. So sort of echoing this, we found that 57% of participating co-ops offer training on cultural awareness, unconscious bias, or related topics, but that implementation of best practices is uneven. So, for example, although the vast majority of participating co-ops that offer DEI training deliver at least some portion in person and use active forms of instruction, only 1/3 have intensive training that takes 4 hours or more in totality. So Next slide, please. So it's important to remember, again, that cooperatives are sort of distinct from conventional firms in several meaningful ways. They're organized for the mutual benefit of members. They democratically control their enterprise, either directly or through an elected board of directors. And this sort of the cooperative principle of concern for community means that they should conceptualize their stakeholders more broadly than members alone. And so, as Sylandi mentioned earlier, like this work is embedded in the co-op model. But we can't just sit on that, rest on that. We need to make sure that we're being proactive in our approach to this work. And so all of this taken together, sort of our findings from the DEI survey, implies that DEI in cooperatives is not only about internal practices targeting employees, but also about the extent to which a cooperative's membership and leadership reflects and empowers the broader community it serves. So the third takeaway was that the adoption of DEI interventions aimed at cooperative directors, members, and other stakeholders was pretty mixed. This is certainly true when it comes to systematically tracking demographic data, which is often a prerequisite for the kinds of DEI practices most likely to impact workplace inequality, at least. So while 60% of respondents systematically track data about staff race and about half track staff gender, far fewer respondents track these characteristics of members or directors. You can see on this slide here. So for example, when it comes to directors, about half of participating co-ops systematically track demographic characteristics of board members like gender or race. And in terms of DEI interventions aimed at members, we found that only a quarter of participating co-ops systematically track demographic data about members. So it can, you know, to state the obvious, you can't, to not say it. Well, you have to measure it in order to track change, but that's not the saying. You have to measure it first if you're going to then measure progress. All right, next slide. So when it comes to DEI interventions targeting the broader community, adoption was, especially uneven. So most participating, this is good. Most participating co-ops are educating their members about governance, and thus, educating members about how to assert their democratic member control within the cooperative. 3/4 of participating co-ops are partnering with or donating to organizations that are building community power. But this was mentioned a little earlier, sort of how are we reporting back to members? How are we keeping this front and center? Only 21% of respondents report on their DEI efforts to members. And only 15% have a purchasing policy that prioritizes contracts with members of historically marginalized groups. So, this survey of NCBA members and the data collected as part of the Cooperative Governance Research Initiative, is really setting the stage for all cooperatives to benchmark their own organizational practices related to member representation, to meeting member needs, and to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also to identify the areas of improvement and sort of conduct their own surveys and audits that are better suited to the experiences and perspectives at the individual level. So to wrap up, I have a couple of final questions, and so I'll start with the first one. This work is hard. These conversations can be, uncomfortable. We sometimes say it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And as in all things in life, there are things we can control, and there are things we cannot control. That is true in this space as well. And so, first, I'd like to hear from each of you quickly about, maybe one or two of the challenges or obstacles that you've faced in this work so far. So I'm trying to remember my order here. Sylandi, Eric, Allanah.
Sure, thanks, Courtney. Yes, I mean, in terms of challenges, I think for one, probably in understanding again what that kind of common language around diversity is a huge one. But to kind of lean in a little bit to some of the findings as well that we're seeing in this report, is this topic of training. And you're completely right in the fact that, one-off trainings, questioning maybe how effective that is. And it really requires that kind of ongoing commitment, making sure that's an ongoing part of the conversation. And not to discount the importance of that. I mean, the research that we saw here, with University of Wisconsin and CDF and NCBA to even, my current organization, OCDC, shows that, cooperative boards, both in developed and in developing countries, do benefit from those trainings, especially when you're thinking about early stage cooperatives, where you may have board members who, aren't as used to the board practices or principles, and needing to have that as a part of the process. But I think that one of the things that we've kind of embedded to, just supplement, not just doing the training, is kind of also what Eric mentioned, is how you're kind of incorporating those constant feedback mechanisms as well throughout the process. If we take a program that we think is great and implement it in the organization, and when it actually gets down to the employees, to the staff, to members, to other stakeholders, again, kind of beyond just what we define as community, and it's not quite working and we need to adjust, then, that's what we need to do. And so I think that that's very important when you think about how we're kind of making sure we're doing a meaningful integration into our co-op culture and operations overall with any of our DEI practices. And again, making sure that we're being held accountable to that as an organization. And, if we have areas where we're falling short, or we're seeing we're falling short because of the measures that we put in place with things like our strategic plan, making sure that, again, we have those mechanisms to hold, leaders accountable as well. In the NCBA CLUSA, we have as well our equity and inclusion working group that really exists to kind of serve as that resource to other committees on the board. So looking at things like policies, is there inclusive language? I mean, are we using just chairmen in all of our language, or are we using more inclusive terms to show, representation from a lot of different areas? And so just making sure that it's something that is continuously embedded throughout the entire organization through various operations. DEI isn't just something that kind of sits on its own in its corner and just exists because we say it exists, but something that's a resource for all of our operations, because it's truly embedded into everything. It's embedded into our staffing, it's embedded into our hiring, it's embedded into our organizational culture as a whole as well. And so just making sure we have the mechanisms in place to support that, I think is one of the most important things.
Great. Thank you. Eric, obstacle or challenge?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we experience is as you can expect, not everyone shares the same views when it relates to DEI. And I mean, one of our members was quite vocal in expressing their concerns and displeasure about REC launching this initiative. And they came in front of the board and directly told us. But so while we recognize that not everyone has the same views or this or any matter, I mean, our board and leadership, we're fully committed to it. And I think that's something we have to understand. That, I mean, we feature it prominently on our website. We have it as under our governance documents now as DEI policy, so it's there for our members to see. And I mean, another thing that I think was when we were creating this, not only do we have kind of our grassroots from our members up, but we also brought in consultants to give an outside perspective. And I think that's sometimes can be a little challenging because they might highlight a blind spot that you have. And it's tough not to feel defensive when somebody does that and says, hey, have you ever considered this? And I think everyone's immediately wants to dig in their heels and say, no, that's not, we're doing it the right thing. And I think that was something that was important for us to kind of acknowledge it and take that into consideration. So while it was challenging, I think overall it was a positive thing. I think it's something we can learn from and make sure we're being mindful of how we approach this topic. And so I think in the long term it was a good thing, but it certainly was challenging to start with.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. All right, Allanah, obstacle or challenge?
I would say for the board and for operations, one of the biggest obstacles for us was walking through the difficult times. So this isn't easy work, and it shouldn't be seen as easy work. And to, echo what's already been said, this is an ever-changing climate. So, when I was growing up, we weren't talking about pronouns in the way that we are now. So this is why you have to start with your why. It's not why because somebody said I have to do it. It's why because I respect the people that I work with, and I want them to understand that. And I want them to understand I'm trying when I forget or when I'm moving very quickly, because you're really undoing a lot of what you've been doing for years upon years. And so you really have to work on the intrapersonal of the individual, of the small group, of the organization before you really get to the interpersonal. So before you reach out to the LGBTQ community, you have to understand, does your language reflect respect? Do your interactions reflect respect, or do you have some things that may be unconscious that you're not realizing? And are you ready for somebody to truly have a conversation and say, I understand what you're trying to do, but what this looks like, it's offensive. You have to be prepared for that, because it's not all pretty. It's not like you see on TV, like it's not a Hallmark movie where you're gonna, everybody's gonna come around and sing in a circle and everything. And it's gonna challenge a lot of what you're built on. So at the end of the day, we still have to make sales. And in retail, in food, you celebrate holidays. So you do now have people that say, you shouldn't call it Christmas. And you're thinking, how do I do this? How does it feel? And you have to be ready to stand in whatever you do moving forward. So if you say, I don't want to do DEI, you have to stand in that, and you have to say it with everything you have. But if you say, I want to do DEI, and that next Christmas comes around and people say, why are you doing this? Your team has to have had that conversation to say, this is why we're doing it, and we also respect you too, because it's going to change. Life changes. We are not the Industrial Revolution. We are not, nobody thought that there would be cryptocurrency that you can't see. You have to also do the same thing when it comes to respect for each other. The DEI is not new. This has been going on for all of the years that this country has ever been alive, but you have to be prepared no matter what you do, whether it's just your leadership, whether it's all staff. You have to prepare your staff and prepare yourself for those times, especially when somebody very close to you, one of your work colleagues, your best friends in the office says, what you're saying or doing has been very offensive to me, and I haven't really been able to speak up. But now that you've created this space, I would like to be a part of this change. It hurts. It's happened to me. It will happen to somebody later today and tomorrow, but you have to be ready, because you're doing this because you want everybody to know you're a part of this. We're a co-op. We have principles that have existed all these years for a reason, and we're going to make sure that we stand our ground and say, you know what, you are welcome, and I'm going to figure out a way to create space. You can come however you are, and we're all going to celebrate it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, some of the data doesn't paint the rosiest picture, but that's part of the point. The phrase I was trying to come up with earlier was, you cannot manage what you don't measure. So I see these, this data, these types of studies as a jumping off point for conversation. And so I really appreciate all of you being willing to come and have this conversation with me here. It can be a vulnerable space to be in. And so I really want to, thank you all for being here. And I'd like to end on a positive note. Like an American movie, we'll go out with something nice. So we have about a minute until we need to move on to questions from the audience. So could you just share a success or something related to this work at your co-op that you're just really proud of, or that sort of warms your heart? So we will go in reverse order. Allanah, Eric, and then Sylandi, you'll get the final word.
I overall, in the dual roles that I hold, I'm really proud of my people. I'm proud of what Weaver Street has done through all of this time, through the difficulty, through the hard conversations that I've pushed us through. As I see the changes that we're making in our interview processes, in our procurement process for our different products, and really looking to challenge historical norms and saying that we're going to be the leaders in all of this. And then our board has taken it on with such open arms. I'm proud of every single person that has joined any part of this journey.
Thanks. Eric?
Yeah, I think while a lot of organizations require employees to participate in DEI activities, RDC chose kind of a different approach, and we're proud and excited to say that, I think the positive response has been overwhelming, from, employees choosing to participate in the offered trainings, to being proactive and working with their fellow coworkers. It's evident in all we do that our cooperative lives up to our core values of caring, respect, integrity, and service. We've won several awards in the last couple of years, and those are a nice pat on the back. But I think to me, that's actually seeing it day to day is more important. Seeing it in our employees, seeing it in their board members, that to me is something that's much more long term than a plaque that goes on the wall. But while those are nice, the recognition, I think that is more sustainable to see that taking place organically in front of us.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eric. Sylandi?
Yeah, so many things. I mean, I'm extremely proud that, NCBA just doesn't, talk the talk, but walks the walk as well. But, also recognizes that, this work, as we've said before, is ongoing, that we all have opportunities to grow and learn. There's never a cap on this subject, or this topic or this issue. Extremely proud, looking back at even the staff level, when we engaged a compensation consultant to come in, it resulted in, a third of our employees receiving an adjustment in their grade level and salary, and that was done regardless of budgetary considerations. It was something that was done because it needed to be done. Proud of our international work and the fact that, we are living out these values not only here in the US, but abroad as well, and making sure that we're prioritizing locally led development and localization at all different levels, and making sure that that's reflected in our leaders, in our employees, both domestically and abroad. So really proud to be a part of this work.
Great. Well, thank you again to all three of you. I really, really appreciate you being here, taking the time to share your perspectives and your experiences. And now I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Bow, if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you to the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives for this really important research that you're doing and you plan to continue to do.
Oh yeah, in 2 days. We're going back out. Fingers
so
crossed.
that's a heads up to all the cooperatives out there. Watch for this opportunity to participate in this very important research. And I can see why you have turned to Allanah, Eric, and Sylandi for some of the perspectives. It's one thing to take a look at the research. It's another thing to put it into context. So thank you. Thank you all for providing great context to this. One of the, there's two primary reasons that we have this interagency working group on cooperative development. And one is to highlight the potential of the cooperative model to accomplish great things across the United States that would be especially of interest to the federal government. And the second reason is to highlight to uncover some of the resources available within the federal government that could be utilized by cooperatives. So we are fortunate. We do have a couple of representatives of federal agencies that are on the line. And if some of our some of the federal family members, if they would be willing to come off unmute or to drop a few notes in the chat about some of the resources, be it information resources, be it financial resources, be it data resources, that could be of assistance to cooperatives as they're engaging in expanding their governance, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I know that we had Brianna Ruiz Fernandez from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She was having a little bit of trouble earlier with unmuting. So she did drop into the chat a small business lending rule of frequently asked questions that may be of assistance. Brianna, if you're able to unmute and want to say a few words, that would be terrific. If not, that's fine too. We've got, thank you for sharing those resources. Okay. Sylandi, because you brought up the international aspect, I'm going to put on the spot our friend Abby Anderson with the USAID, Agency for International Development. I know in speaking with her that they have had some great experiences with advocating for the cooperative model and for taking a more diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Abby, if you're willing to.
No problem. Margaret, I was just about to jump in, chime in. But yeah, no, this was a really amazing conversation. I'm really excited to see some familiar faces. Sylandi, I mean, the work that everyone's doing here is amazing in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And honestly, internally, even in the agency, that's something we're constantly working towards. On sort of the CDP side of things, we've been really focused. I mean, one of the first thoughts that comes to mind is gender inclusion and women's empowerment, and we've been really focused on that and highlighting those success stories and showing how, you know, strengthening the capacity of cooperatives around the world is, I mean, it's not intrinsically linked, but it's sort of empowering these different marginalized communities around the world. And recently in our year in review report, we highlighted Equal Exchange's work with some of the organic banana value chain cooperatives they work with there, and how there's been some leadership opportunities through cooperatives for a lot of the women in these communities. And I think that sort of speaks to that DEI perspective and bringing it to the cooperative members. But yeah, no, this has been a great conversation. I'll drop that year in review in the chat as well.
Thank you so much for that, Abby. Excellent point. I noticed that we have two people that served on the USDA Equity Commission, and that was a very extensive review of taking a look under the hood at some of the practices that USDA has historically engaged in, and the Equity Commission made some very concrete recommendations for how to become more inclusive. And Benga Adjalori and Doug O'Brien, Benga with the Office of the Secretary of Agriculture, and Doug O'Brien, of course, with NCBA CLUSA, were both on that commission. And I'm wondering if either of you would be willing to say a few words.
Well, I will let
Benga, I can defer, Benga.
Well, actually, I did not serve on the Equity Commission, but I helped out with it. And but actually would pass it over to Doug to talk about some of the work that they did. And then I could bring in some of the other things too. But I'll let you start, Doug.
Sure. Thank you, Benga. And thank you, Margaret, for the opportunity. A great conversation today, all around. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, as Margaret mentioned, so USDA launched an equity commission at the beginning of 2023. I think it was. It might have sort of started toward the end of 2022. And it had two subcommittees, one focused on agriculture community and the other one on rural community economic development. There were a number of people. I was honored to be able to serve on the subcommittee for rural community economic development, and cooperative issues were talked about quite a bit within that subcommittee, and then eventually with the commission. The commission's charter, and Benga can correct me, but essentially it was to ensure that historically underrepresented communities had access to USDA programs and kind of USDA, support and technical assistance. And in the cooperative realm, there were a couple things that I'll mention very quickly. One was the commission adopted a recommendation that that USDA and policymakers look at cooperatives as a solution to inequity. In the past, in rural places, particularly within agriculture and utilities, people have been able to access markets, have been able to access critical services, particularly electric and other utilities. And so that it pointed to that history and as cooperatives as a way to deal with inequality and inequity. In another section, the commission adopted a recommendation on ensuring that there is diverse and equitable representation on the boards. And there was a recognition that there's work to do, and not in every geography and not every co-op across the country necessarily has the best practices. It pointed to some data that is out there that indicates that there are some issues. And so the recommendations included that USDA support more public awareness of how to be involved in the democratic process of board elections, including with working with stakeholders on the ground who represent historically or of the historically underrepresented communities. Oh, and also it did mention that it recommended, not mentioned, the commission adopted a recommendation that USDA gather more data on representation of utility cooperatives in particular. So those are a few things that came up in the Equity Commission. Benga.
Yeah, that was great, Doug. A really good breakdown of it. And I think the only thing I want to add to that, so I put in a link, website that has the description about the Equity Commission, the reports from it. Also, there were 6 public meetings, and so there's a lot of information there about the deliberation about it. But the one thing I want to emphasize is that, a lot of times you have these reports, you have these commissions together, they make a report, and then no one does anything about it, right? But one of the biggest emphasis now is like there's work on implementation and, having people check up on it. And so, given, all the data that's been done, all the work that this panel's been doing, be involved with USDA. It's one of those things that this is about transparency and accountability, but that can only happen with the outside stakeholders hold our feet to the fire. And so look at the data that you guys have, look at the work that you guys have, and, even bringing some of your expertise and say, these are some of the things that you can do at USDA that are some of the things that we can help you with. That's why I want to encourage people, not just on the panel, but who are sitting in on this too, to be able to hold us accountable for making sure that there's more diversity, more, better government, more equitable work there. So thank you. Thank you, Margaret.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Benga. I see that our friend Kent Forte with SAMHSA, with the Centers for Health Services, he put in a few points. I don't know, Kent, if you're able to unmute and speak about this, or else we could direct people to read what's happening in the chat.
Yeah, I'm on. I don't know if you can see me or not, but happy Mental Health Awareness Month, by the way, from SAMHSA, your friends at HHS and SAMHSA. But yeah, a couple things just want to highlight it. I got a buddy here working with me today. But the DEIA strategic plan for all of our 82,000 that work at HHS, that's kind of our what we follow in terms of our HHS strategic plan. So you can take some things that are probably, a lot of plans, you can pair out things that are applicable to you. It has a rich, diversity of information within our DEI plan. And then getting down to some very, very specific things in the disaster response space. Obviously, when a disaster happens, SAMHSA wants to support that the best that we can. Thinking about behavioral health is something that sometimes gets kind of the backseat treatment when you're up front with all of your disasters, but certainly behavioral health is something very important. So specifically, we have a technical assistance center there, but it has diversity within that. So that's a rich resource for all sorts of things, but certainly with disasters in mind. Then we have behavioral health equity writ large. Again, something to make sure that we're kind of thinking about equitable access. I know access to behavioral health care has been traditionally something, again, doesn't get the full attention that it deserves. So just we're up in front about that as well. And then lastly, of my first link, SAMHSA just released their behavioral health. Sorry, my phone is ringing in the background. Evidence-based practices resource center. A lot just evidence-based, so it doesn't necessarily have diversity forefront, but it's a really rich space for anything behavioral health wise. And then lastly, under the HHS umbrella of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, there's a no-kidding tool for assessing and kind of the tip sheet on how to assess your program to see if it has diversity included. So it's just a nice toolkit from HHS, from our Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. It's kind of our research node within HHS. So those are a few gems for you to take a look at.
Yes.
And nice presentation.
Yeah, thank you for those resources. Yes, we've got and we celebrate with you. Yes. Oh, great. And a young cooperator. We always want to encourage young cooperators.
For sure.
Yes.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Jasmine Wardlaw with Employee Benefit Security Administration with the Department of Labor is still on. I don't know if she would like to unmute. If not, you could put a few items in the chat.
I am. I'm here, Margaret. How is everyone? It's been really informative. And I just wanted to just say on a personal note, I joined a food co-op 2 weeks ago. So I'm very excited about that. I wanted to put that in the chat while you guys were talking, but it's all very fascinating. And yeah, I'm still very excited to be part of this community.
Very
I have to ask which food co-op. Which food co-op is it?
Newark Natural Foods in Newark, Delaware.
Oh, nice. Fun.
Very good. Good. Thank you so much, Jasmine. And thank you for joining the co-op community as often as you have been in the last several years. We really appreciate the Department of Labor stepping up with that. Thank you.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
We have a little bit of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. Does anyone wish to ask some questions or to share any observations? If not, I come from a line of teachers, and I'm very good at following their lead and calling on people.
I thought you were going to say you were going to let us go early, but that's actually not what any teacher has ever done.
No.
As a professor, I do that sometimes. I let my students go early, but I can't think of a teacher that did that.
No. I might actually call upon. We have I'm Andy Jermolowitz. Are you on? If you're able to say a few words of wisdom. Otherwise, Jim Wadsworth, if you'd like to say a few words of wisdom with the ongoing research that you have been conducting into the statistics of cooperatives.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure Andy's on. I apologize for not having my camera on. I have my screen set up a different way. Yeah, we try to, so I survey all the farmer cooperatives in the United States, as most of you know. And Courtney, thanks for all that governance work. That's great. One thing I should bring up a little bit is that if the Equity Commission report ends up having some teeth behind it, which means money, there's a section in there on co-op agreements for doing this kind of research. And as Courtney knows, and other people at universities and elsewhere know, that you need money to do research, so to carry it on and make it grow over the years. So hopefully that, it won't even take a lot, I don't think. So anyway, in our ag co-op statistics service, and I will say, Eric, there's quite a few, as you know, quite a bit of farming in Virginia, especially Shenandoah Valley and such. And I've worked with quite a few cooperatives over there, and they report their statistics in too. But one thing we try to do, we gather the number of board directors on a board, and we do go through and see how many women there are. I think some of the co-ops in the South have a little more diversity, but we don't collect that. In the past, we have done studies where we have asked those questions when we had more staff, specifically researching farmer cooperatives, but we just don't have that staff anymore. But my data set shows less than yours, Courtney, about just under 4% women on boards of directors, but that doesn't mean mine's more accurate because we don't have all the co-ops either. So you're getting a subset of the whole population. But great presentations today. I really enjoyed it. That's all I got. Thanks. Back to you, Margaret.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So, any last words? Mary Griffin, go ahead with the Cooperative Development Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, and great job, Courtney and everyone. I just wanted to let folks know we also had another report on our DEI with sort of pulling everything together with what we had heard over a two-year project. And there's some interesting insights in the report about some actions groups at various levels can take. So I'll be happy to share that with folks. But very happy this is moving along. And thanks again, USDA, for always thinking about cooperatives.
Well, very good. Well, I think that brings us to a close. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Courtney, Allanah, Eric, and Sylandi for the wonderful work that the great research and the lived experiences that you've shared. And I think I am going to turn it over to Robbie for our concluding remarks.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Margaret always says it best. So we appreciate you coming here. We do have our next meeting set in July. And I'm feverishly scrolling down to make sure I get the name right, but it's Cooperatives and the Prison System, a strategy for rehabilitation. And Margaret, that is on July
11th.
11th. Thank you, because I was going to say the wrong date. And just like our administrator said, in October, we are going to go over urban co-op ecosystems, transformations in worker ownership, housing, and community development. So we hope you can be there, and just watch out for emails or our bulletins for the links to join. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.